It's really important to not follow a linear roadmap. And what I mean by that is a lot of the times if you ask, someone working at like Google or whatnot as a software engineer, they'll give you a very like step-by-step roadmap of exactly what you need to do to get to that goal. But in reality, a lot of the journey is very non-linear. And I find that the most successful people are the ones who kind of start off without, seeing a lot of tangible potential. I do think there are certain periods of time when you do want to diversify, but there's also certain periods of time where you do want to converge on something. So last year was the year where I tried to diverge into a lot of different fields. So I did like software engineering, like embedded systems, product design, product management, leadership. And having that one period of time, I would recommend usually the first year of college or kind of like the transition year where you're able to try things out to really take advantage of that time and take every opportunity that's given to you. One thing I realized is I'm not super happy in like very concrete corporate environments. And I don't know if you see this in my background or not, but my path is actually pretty non-linear, at least compared to a lot of people that I know. Not a good or bad thing, but it's just objectively, it is very non-linear.
Guys, before we get into the podcast, 91.6% of you guys are not subscribed. So please do hit the subscribe button since it will help get even crazier guests and blow up the channel. So yeah, let's get back into the video.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Gen Z Fastlane. Today we have Jasmine here, who is an incoming sophomore for UC Irvine. So Jasmine, why don't you just do a brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me here. I saw your podcast and I think it's super cool what you guys are doing. But yeah, just a brief introduction to myself. So my name is Jasmine. I'm an incoming second year at UC Irvine. I'm currently studying computer science and cognitive science. And cognitive science is basically like computational neuroscience. So a lot of it has to do with data and a little bit of engineering. And yeah, so I guess I've been in tech my entire life. And previously, I worked as a designer and dev at an international high school startup incubator. And that's basically where I was introduced to the entire tech world. That was also where I devved and designed the entire e-commerce product from scratch. So before that, something surprising that people might not know is I actually played a ton of Minecraft and Roblox. That's actually where I built a clothing business on Roblox that got like 2,000 sales in a month. And currently I'm working as a marketing manager at a NASA Artemis mission program. So essentially I'm leading a team of engineers to build a mission control system and a mission concept proposal to operate a lunar rover to search the South Poles for water. So I'm super excited to see where that goes. We're actually in the tail end of the research program, so a lot of things are currently wrapping up. But yeah, that's a little bit of background on me.
Nice. So I think for this podcast, we're going to go in more like a chronological order because when I was looking at your profile, I was really impressed by like the list of things that you were doing, right? Which we're all going to dive into. So you started off with your journey, as you've mentioned, creating like clothing assets for Roblox character using 2D and 3D modeling, which I feel like is pretty unique because if you think about it, like if you're younger, you'll most likely be a consumer for, different games, right? Rather than creating your own assets. So what actually inspired you to do this when you're like 15 and 16 years old back then?
Yeah. So yes, I was 15 years old back then, and it was actually during the height of COVID where there was a lockdown and there wasn't any school at all. So one thing that really inspired me, and it's something that I've been doing like throughout my youth, is that I've always been creating and building things. Even when I was super young, like I used to build cardboard claw machines from scratch with just cardboard and duct tape. And so the main reason I started the business was actually kind of out of personal interest because it was a very low barrier to entry and it allowed me to basically play test which products performed the best, which is something that was very exciting to me. And before this time, I actually did something very similar in Minecraft where I spent a lot of my time experimenting with different buildings and cityscapes, and Roblox was essentially like an easy next step to commercialize my designs. And then another big part of it was really kind of a self-expression thing. I found that a lot of the clothing assets on Roblox that were actually made by, I think, like designers on Roblox wasn't really cutting my style and standards. So I just decided to go out of my way and make my own. And yes, at that time, I actually didn't have any tech at all. So I didn't have a personal computer. I don't think I had a phone at a time. I just had like a flip phone. And so I did everything on my school's Chromebook, which was like the thing that they would give every single student. And so there really wasn't a lot of freedom. But yeah, that was where I designed all of my assets. So like hand painted everything from scratch on a trackpad. But one thing I really liked about the experience was actually the challenge of being given very limited resources and still making something out of it. Because like I mentioned earlier, I built like claw machines out of nothing but cardboard and tape when I was younger. And this is also something that I've done at hackathons now because the environment is also very scrappy. So it's just something that I really enjoyed is like the really scrappy environment of being able to do like as much as possible with a limited amount of resources. So yeah, I'd say my main inspiration was purely intrinsic at first. It was just something I naturally enjoyed. And also I knew I was really good at what I did because of friends and family members who told me about like design and stuff. And so it was just a really exciting prospect to not only make money, but also create something that I naturally enjoy doing. But yeah.
Nice, super nice. So, like with all of the different experiences that you have, how do you determine like when it's the right time to kind of like transition from, creating these Roblox game design like assets to like pursuing something else, being like chief product and everything else?
Mhm. Yeah, one thing I really like telling, everyone who asks me that kind of question is that it's really important to not follow a linear roadmap. And what I mean by that is a lot of the times, if you ask, someone working at like Google or whatnot as a software engineer, they'll give you a very like step-by-step roadmap of exactly what you need to do to get to that goal. But in reality, a lot of the journey is very non-linear. And I find that the most successful people are the ones who kind of start off without seeing a lot of tangible potential. So these are people who are like trying out businesses, like building their own like cheat codes or whatnot in Minecraft. Basically people who are pursuing what they're naturally interested in. And what I always say is that like as long as you have a clear general direction of where you want to head, it really doesn't matter how you get there. It just matters that you continuously follow what your natural instinct tells you to go. So for me, my natural instinct was, again, like building things from scratch, building things from very limited materials. That's something that I did when I was really, really young. Like even a toddler, I would build doll houses and I would build furniture for like My Little Pony dolls or whatnot. So it was really something that was natural to me. And it was something that like no one told me to do. It was just kind of how I naturally transitioned is, oh, I discovered design. And then the next step was me discovering product design and UI UX. And then after that, I realized there's something bigger, which was being in a product space and developing more cutting edge assets for a larger group of people. So for me, I would say I don't really have a roadmap because when I was doing it, I wasn't thinking about it logically necessarily. It was just where I was naturally pulled. So I would say for people who want to transition or are kind of planning like when they should change, I think really just follow where you naturally want to go and like where your interests pull you, and that like your interest, your natural instinct almost never lie to you. So yeah.
Nice. Nice. So following that like internal spark that you have, like deep down, I guess. So like let's just say for example, like following up with this question, if there was another opportunity presented to you, is there like a certain criteria that you personally like look for to determine whether you want to take on this opportunity? As we've probably all have encountered like so many different opportunities out there.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's a very great question. And that's also something that I'm also learning right now because last year I kind of took every opportunity that was presented to me And I don't regret anything, but I do think there are certain periods of time when you do want to diversify, but there's also certain periods of time where you do want to converge on something. So last year was the year where I tried to diverge into a lot of different fields. So I did like software engineering, like embedded systems, product design, product management, leadership. And having that one period of time, I would recommend usually the first year of college or kind of like the transition year where you're able to try things out to really take advantage of that time and take every opportunity that's given to you. Obviously, there has to be a certain kind of direction you went ahead. For me, I knew very concretely that I wanted to enter the tech and product space. And so everything I did, even though they were different, they were still aligned to that kind of broad goal. So yeah, one thing I would recommend is take one period of time to diversify your experience palette, but then also have another period of time where you concretely identify it as a period for convergence. So next year, at least for me, I'm planning to focus mostly in applied engineering, embedded systems, and subject matter expertise that relate to my goals in aerospace and defense. So I think the most important part isn't necessarily like in the moment determining if you want an opportunity or not, but realizing in a broad scope, what period are you in? Are you in a period of exploration and kind of trying out a lot of different things and seeing what you like and don't like? Or are you in a period where you have identified like, oh, I really like the aerospace industry and I really like product. So now I'm going to refine my timeline and really focus in that direction. So yeah, that's kind of how I like to modularize things. Instead of thinking about just opportunity, I like to think about how the opportunity fits into the grand scheme of my goals. Yeah.
Nice. And do you think this period of, like converging on something versus diverging kind of like fluctuates? So I guess like after a while, then you should go back to converging or diverging, depending on which one you're in right now.
Yeah. No, I definitely think that, it is kind of a non-linear curve for sure. Like you are going to have periods where even in like the middle of your university, you decide that you were following a wrong path that wasn't aligned to your natural interests. And so you can decide to kind of completely pivot and change your career trajectory into something that aligns better to what you're intrinsically kind of motivated by, right? So for me, I would say it doesn't matter when necessarily it happens, but you just have to have a very distinct kind of mindset when you're going towards opportunities of understanding at this moment right now, what period am I in? You don't necessarily have to look at like the broad roadmap and forecast every single potential period of growth, convergence, and divergence in the future, but you really want to identify like what period you are in right now. So it's still kind of focusing in the present moment, but it's more so taking that opportunity and putting it into a larger scope, if that makes sense.
Yeah, nice. I really like this analogy, especially
Hmm.
for people who are younger, because I think younger people can take a lot more risks compared to if you're in your 30s, right? You might want to start thinking about, getting a family and like stabilizing down. So that's going to be harder to take more risks. So I think the golden years are, yeah, like when you're younger, like trying to start as young as possible. So like moving on to chief product officer, like what does a product manager do? Like if you could just briefly give me a summary.
Yeah. So Um, one thing that I've noticed is that when you throw out the term product management, it's a very nebulous term. Like most people would not know what it means. So I'm going to try to kind of modularize it into, I think, two core responsibilities of any product leader, right? So the core of any successful product manager, I think, is twofold. So number one is a very deep understanding of the customer and a deep customer empathy. Because one thing I've noticed is a lot of engineers and people in tech industry tend to hyperfixate on the solution and not really understand how their solution benefits the customer. So focusing on the features in the end product and not really having frequent conversations with the actual users is actually one of the biggest downfalls of companies, because not only are you deviating from what the customer wants, but number two is that it makes you a lot more discouraged, because whenever you see a product or like a feature that is very similar to yours, then you'll think like, oh, there's no reason to start my company. And I'm not just saying this like out of my head. It has actually happened before. And I actually know people who have not pursued startups because of this exact reason. So, number one, I think most important is having very deep customer empathy. Something else I think is equally important, perhaps not as important, is having a grounded vision, yet it needs to have a clear direction. So a lot of the times when we think about like mission statements about your company, it seems kind of ambiguous and doesn't have a very solid direction for where a team should head. So I think the best product managers don't just define a very clear objective or like define a very ambiguous goal, but they define kind of general vertical of where all their actions should head. So one example with Chronicle, which was the company where I was kind of leading a lot of product efforts, was that we were focusing a lot on solving the core issue that we had, which was a lot of users couldn't find a community or centralized place where they could enhance their learning outside the academic environment. So that is not a super clearly defined goal, like making X amount of money, but it still gives you a clear direction of like every single product decision or feature that I make needs to align to this kind of long-term direction I went ahead, which is solving this core customer pain point. So overall, I think those are the two main things that make a successful product manager or a product leader, which, to summarize everything, is a very fine balance between having a very strong creative vision, but also having a strategic and analytical mindset to know how to execute that vision and align it to a long-term goal. So I hope that answered your question, but I know like the field itself is very broad and there's still a lot of questions about what exactly the role is. So I'm happy to kind of expand on anything that you're interested in.
Yeah, nice. So personally, this sounds to me like it's kind of like a mixture of, like executive role and a marketing role, since you're also, trying to find product market fit. So could you also break down like kind of your day-to-day timeline of what you do like every single week? Like, do you check in a lot with clients, or what's it more like for you?
Yeah. So currently I'm actually the project manager for the NASA research program. So it is a little bit different than product management, but I can give you some insight on the more product management role from my previous experience. So a lot of it, I think, is very different from what people might think, because I imagine that people would think of a product role as figuring out the features, putting it on a roadmap, defining the roadmap, and being like very technically involved. But 99% of the time is actually talking to users. Talking to users and doing customer discovery is the most important thing of any product leader. And also, I think it's the part that people fall through the most, especially with very technical teams, I think. You tend to focus a lot on the solution and delivering an end result, but not really being able to iterate very fast, because you're not talking to users, you're not actually understanding if what they want is aligned to what you're building. So one example I can give is I'm actually part of a startup called Dispatch AI, and it was a startup that was founded from the Berkeley AI hackathon, where we won first place. And that was one of the first times where I was very deeply involved and talking to the actual end users, which were emergency dispatchers at 911 centers. So we actually went to these dispatch centers and were talking directly to them, understanding their pain points, understanding, what kind of points of their entire user journey of interacting with their software is causing them a lot of frustration. So that has actually helped us a lot in pivoting the product and really aligning our the end product that we're shipping to a very specific niche of frustrations that they were experiencing. So to summarize everything, I think that a majority of your time as a product manager is actually spent either in meetings or hopping on calls with stakeholders, but especially users. Users are the most important stakeholders, and really getting to the root of what their problems are and continuing to iterate and refine your product based on what they say. So yeah.
Gotcha. Nice. So let's just say, for example, you talk to a client and you realize that their target user does not have this pain point that, their software, whatever solution like they're covering, right? So what would be like kind of like the conversation that you'll have with the company, like letting them know that their target audience will not benefit from the product currently because it does not solve their pain points.
Mhm. Yeah. So obviously, whenever you're doing customer discovery, it shouldn't just be from one user. It should be a conglomeration of insights from a lot of different kinds of users in different segments, and involving the user research team and the designers in consolidating what the end verdict is. So I think that's the first thing to keep in mind, is that it's never just one user. In terms of proposing a change in features to the executive team or anyone making huge product decisions, I think the most important part stems from the actual culture itself, is that every successful company, or any company in general, should have a very strong focus on the end user, which means that every decision should be made for the user. So I think number one is gaining alignment with that, is whenever you start a conversation about potentially changing a feature, adding one or removing one, it should never begin with the technical specs or whatnot, unless that is a very, very big issue. But it should begin with how it benefits the user and how it kind of drives the end vision, right? Like what I was talking about earlier, with the problem being students lacking a community of motivated individuals and places where they can further their learning. Things like that, of aligning your proposition towards either a common pain point everyone has and also on end vision, is very important. Something else I would say is that um, outside of alignment to user research, it's very, very important to present concrete metrics. So you shouldn't just say like, oh, a lot of users are experiencing X issue and they're feeling this pain point, but it should always be backed up with some kind of business metric, or some kind of user research metric to show tangible impact, and also kind of allow different stakeholders, especially those in more executive teams, who are going to be looking at the numbers first, how much impact you can make on a user group, or for user research, for example, how many people are experiencing this problem, or what business metric you can drive. So I think at the end of the day, to summarize, it's important to have a very clear alignment between your proposal, the business objectives, and the user needs. Those are the main three things. Things like technical specs and all of that, uh, those involve conversations with your developers and designers, but it isn't as important for pitching to like a executive team, for example.
Awesome. So like in this chief product management, uh industry, what would you say are the some of the core softwares that you use, and what do you think are some of the future trends that you see, will take over the industry?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question. So in terms of software, I think there's a lot of industry standards, like Jira, for example. Some prefer Notion, some prefer Trello, some prefer the GitHub management system. So it really varies, but there is obviously a distinct standard for, creating a roadmap and for ticketing systems, things like that. So I think that the software itself is a pretty straightforward thing that, most people can easily find out. But I think the more interesting question is, what is the next stage or next step of this product industry, right? Because it's, again, kind of ambiguous of what the person's role is. Talking to users, creating a roadmap, defining features. It's all like wearing multiple hats, and people have questions whether this might be taken over by AI. So obviously, I will begin with that. I am still personally exploring this industry, so this is more of my thoughts from everything I've studied, and also from all the hackathons I've been to, and what trends I've been seeing. But I think that the number one thing that's never going to go away are strategic visionaries who can dream of an innovative solution and also execute it effectively. So, especially at this period of time with so much AI and doubts that pure product or project management and getting things done and following a roadmap cannot be automated. I think it's especially important to identify what the core of being a successful product manager is. I think the core is this very fine balance between kind of open-minded experimentation as well as strategic execution. I think that is the most unique part of what makes a successful product leader. Um, and again, while the product position is, quite nebulous and different from company to company, this is one thing that I think will remain constant no matter what product role you go into. And even if AI takes over, like those more manual tasks of like writing tickets or like making a roadmap kind of thing. So um, outside of that, one other thing I think will become very, very big is that data is going to become even more crucial towards business success. So, um, I don't know how much you've been following the AI space, but a lot of the biggest companies like Scale AI, Palantir, et cetera, are really kind of driving everything towards data. It's not just having efficient AI, but it's having high quality data sets and ones that are free of bias and having very effective eval systems. So, a lot of companies and enterprises are also purchasing from these vendors data management systems to help them with decision making and coordinating the massive amount of information that goes into their company. So, really, what I think is that those that can bid for the highest quality data will become the most successful. So, this doesn't just go for a product manager, but a product manager inside of the company in general need to have access to very high quality data. Because if you think about it, a lot of the automation is going to happen based on data points and making decisions from those, right? Like making roadmaps and all of that. Those are all things that require high quality data. So, as a PM or product leader, I think it's most important to learn how to work effectively with AI and learn how to make data driven decisions and synthesize massive amounts of internal data um, inside your company. I think this is not only important for product development and market positioning, but in terms of putting this on the roadmap of like AI and the point we're at now is we have to accept that some things are going to be automated. Like, I'm not necessarily saying that project management will be automated, but there are going to be some parts of PM, software engineering, design, or whatnot that are going to be taken over by AI. So the most important thing is to align what you're good at with kind of pursuing this long term of strategic visionaries that are, I think, going to define the next couple of years when manual tasks are no longer going to matter. So yeah.
Nice. So like talk about how like AI will replace, I guess, low value tasks, and I don't think it predict the future. So I really like how you emphasize the point on how these innovation that we bring as Gen Zs would really make up the future. So like transitioning over to some of your other ventures that you've done. At one
Mm.
point, you were also actually selling streetwear apparels as like a solo business owner. So my question is like, how did you manage to fulfill all of these orders? Because I personally have done e-commerce before, and it can be stressful at times, especially when you're doing it manually, in the beginning, right?
Mm. Yeah. So one thing that's surprising, or maybe not as surprising, but on Christmas Eve, actually, I fulfilled around 200 orders, and I was basically working the entire day from like the morning until night until Christmas morning. So I think part of it was because I just did so much, or I made so many orders, so I found the most efficient system naturally. And especially when so I don't know if I mentioned this, but I actually handmade most of the products from scratch. So either with screen printing or with vinyls, it was all basically handmade from scratch. So for me, it was really about finding the most efficient process when I was doing it, like when I was actually making the orders in person. And I think it's hard to kind of extrapolate across a lot of different businesses because for me, again, I was making orders from scratch, and I had a lot of unique things, like I would give like freebies and stuff. And so I just found like, oh, laying everything out and performing this step first is most efficient, or making the freebies beforehand, instead of like at every single order, was a more efficient strategy than like doing it kind of one at a time. So those are just like small things I think build up, especially for me when I like did it so many times already that it became very natural. So in terms of time management, I think the most important part is like it's really something you have to just keep doing and find your own system. And for me, my system was because I'd repeated it so many times that I knew which way was more efficient. But yeah.
Nice, nice. So like, what were your core like growth or outreach channels like to market all of these products?
Yeah. So my number one outreach channel was TikTok and IG Reels. And a little background about this. So most of my business was actually around this trend, a really big trend on TikTok, called book talk. And so at that time, I was a very, very big reader. So I would read a lot of dark fantasies like Six of Crows and Legends. And so one thing I really leveraged was I knew I had an asymmetric advantage against other people inside that industry because I already knew I already had knowledge about these books, and I also knew what made these people tick. So no pun intended, but I myself was also very involved and kind of had like a obsession with some of these books. So I knew what parts of it they wanted to see and what parts of it would kind of draw on that emotional connection and make them want to buy. Right. So it's kind of I don't know if it's a negative psychology thing, but I still made sure that every product was made to highest quality possible, um, including personalized notes and freebies, things like that. But I think the most important part I learned is that it's twofold. Number one is obviously short form content is the number one marketing tool, I think, at least for a business like mine, where it was very heavily catered towards people with like a fan base, people who were very interested in these books. And then number two is I really leveraged my community. So I knew that book talk people didn't just buy for quality. They didn't just buy for these normal things people would buy for when they look for clothing, but they were buying because of the fan base, because of the community. So I really tailored my entire marketing around that and leveraged what made me tick about these books, and then use that to kind of go viral and um, have people funnel into my store. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So talking about more about like your hackathon. experiences, right? You're a 15 times hackathon winner, which is actually very impressive. So you must be really, avid and passionate for these hackathons. So run us through like kind of like the main reason why someone should join, hackathon if they're trying to pursue something in the tech world, right?
Yeah. No, that's a very great question, and you'll actually be surprised. So we have a very tight-knit community of people who go to a lot of hackathons, and I'm actually connected to people who have even more than me. So mine is actually quite moderate. But yeah, in terms of my experience with hackathons and who I think should participate in these, I think the number one learning I got from hackathons is a large part of it is actually based on how well you're able to sell your product. And if you think about hackathons, right, a lot of people tailor towards this being a very technical, innovation heavy competition. But I think 99% of winners are the ones who are able to sell their product the best. They're able to identify the business model and kind of align their long-term vision to a market potential or some space that they can use as a potential startup venture in the future. So, number one thing I would say is if you want to participate in this kind of competition, I think get rid of your initial notion of what it is and really be open to all the possible opportunities for growth. The number one thing I've learned from doing so many hackathons is um, being able to wear so many different hats because you're not just a developer, as a lot of people might think you are. You're also a product manager, you're a product designer, you're a sales pitcher, you're a business analyst, like almost everything. That's something that I think is overlooked in the industry. And it's also super, super important for growth. Because one problem I've seen a lot is people confine themselves into, I will only go to a hackathon to learn front end development. But they don't see that you can also learn how to develop a successful product, learn how to do UI UX design, like all these different things that are not as heavily emphasized are probably the largest areas of growth. So one thing is that I actually learned all of my programming experience and nearly all of my like business like product experience from hackathons, or at least that's where I think I've had the most exponential growth in both like leadership and sales. Because before that, like I didn't have a lot of sales experience, I didn't have a lot of leadership experience, but having been through that cycle so many times, it's taught me what works, and also it's taught me to be more open to different opportunities. So I think people with an open-minded kind of approach to things are the best suited for these kind of competitions. And yeah, I think that it's just such an important topic that isn't as covered in a lot of mainstream hackathon channels. So I think it's something we should all keep in mind, especially people in the tech community as well.
Nice. So I think hackathons is also something that you can join if even though you don't have like a technical background. So if you're like a business development person, I guess you can also join hackathons and learn from there.
Yeah, for sure. And Um, actually, most of my successful friends have no coding background. Like, one of my friends, she's like a 10 or 11 time hackathon winner as well, and her team was like all designers, like business people, stuff like that. So there is actually a very large potential, and I think it is actually untapped. So I'm really hoping to see a larger group of non CS majors in the hackathon community.
Awesome. So talking about like CS, you're obviously studying cognitive science in and
Mhm.
CS in UC Irvine, right? So could
Mhm.
you briefly let us know like why you chose UCI, like specifically compared to, other universities?
Yeah, for sure. Um, So I'll actually begin with one thing that most people don't know about me is that when I was doing the application cycle, I was actually rejected or waitlisted from almost all the schools, the four schools I applied to. So this was in part because I didn't know what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go, and I also took a lot less advanced classes at that period of time compared to my peers. So the main reason I committed to UCI was because it was the best option at the time without really knowing what was in store for me. However, I'm looking back now and I'm actually so grateful to have made that decision because if I didn't attend UCI, I'd likely be pursuing a much more pure UI UX position and not have pushed myself to the point I have now where where I'm doing engineering, embedded systems, leadership, a bunch of other things. So one thing I want to kind of leave this part with is that I know right now is the college application season, and actually my little brother, he's really worried about college applications right now and applying everywhere. I'm trying to tell him that it's not going to be a big deal after you get past that point. But one thing I realized is it doesn't really matter where you go. What matters the most is what you make out of the opportunities you get. So when I went to UCI and I got into it, I kind of made a pact with myself that I was going to go all in and join as many organizations I could, grow my skill in as many ways as possible. And actually, one thing that a lot of my high school peers would probably know about me is that I used to be a very, very shy person. And I was the person you'd see in the library at lunch every day studying, kind of thing. So in university, I actually decided to completely step out of my comfort zone and apply to a bunch of leadership positions, which I'm actually very lucky to have landed. Um, and now entering my sophomore year, I'm super happy that I made that decision because I now realize that it really doesn't matter. Like, doesn't matter what happens to you necessarily or what failures you get, but the most important part is your attitude towards it and also how you use that failure to either push you further or achieve greater things, or if you go on the other side of the spectrum and decide to completely lose yourself or whatnot. So I hope that my small tidbit of a story can inspire some high school seniors or people who might be going through the application process right now, because I think it really does get better. Especially at that time, I got super depressed, but now I think a lot happier than I was in high school. So yeah.
Nice. So the key is just to, I guess, put yourself out there, fill yourself with as many opportunities as you can, and you'll get to crazy places as long as you're passionate about that industry. So just wrapping everything up, what is your overall purpose? Like, what do you think is your overall purpose? And what do you see yourself doing, like, in the next 10 years, 20 years, as we've previously discussed already, but if you don't mind sharing again.
Yeah. So, as I was mentioning earlier, my main goal is entering the aerospace and defense industry. So that's more of a concrete objective. I realized is I really enjoy the multidisciplinary nature of defense and embedded systems and interfacing between software, hardware, and human interaction. But most specifically, I one thing I realized is I'm not super happy in like very concrete corporate environments. Uh, and I don't know if you see this in my background or not, but my path is actually pretty non-linear, at least compared to a lot of people that I know. Not a good or bad thing, but it's just objectively, it is very non-linear. So my end goal is I hope to work in a field where I can create and ship products that can impact as large of a group as possible. I mentioned to you earlier that my end goal is to become either a product leader, manager, or a VP of product, CPO position. Just any way that I can make as much tangible impact as possible. That is my long-term objective. Right now, my short-term goal is again getting some kind of job in aerospace and defense to gain more hands-on experience. And so right now I'm involved in a lot of engineering product groups, designing mission control systems, telemetry designs, and aerodynamics, which I hope will support me in that direction. So kind of to sum everything up, I'm still kind of allowing things to bring me into this non-linear path wherever it goes, wherever my natural instinct brings me. But I do realize that um, I want to align everything to my long-term objective, which is making a large impact on a small or a large group of people with the products that I develop. So yeah.
Nice. So Jasmine, I really appreciate you hopping on the Gen Z fast lane. All the best with all the things that you're doing. I'm actually probably gonna pursue something like yourself. Like I'm also not that startup type. I mean, like not that corporate type of person. But yeah,
Mm.
hope you guys enjoyed this episode and found this episode useful. If you guys want to contact Jasmine, I'll put all of her contacts in the description. And yeah, until the next one, peace out.